I am very excited about today's guest, bringing you Anna Whiston-Donaldson. She has such an amazing story. I don't want to go into too much detail because we will share it on the interview, but I essentially read an article that my daughter sent me, and it made me cry, and it made me smile. It was the I think an article that I went through so many emotions reading, and I have the link in the show notes. So please read the article because you'll get to know her story from beginning to, well, the part she tells. You'll get to know a lot more details, and her writing. She's such a beautiful writer. We talk about it on the interview, but just the story itself is just amazing. You'll want to share it with your girlfriends, I think. But she's a popular author and speaker whose New York Times bestselling book, Rare Bird, a memoir of loss and love, chronicles the raw early grief of losing her 12-year-old son, Jack, in an accident. It was selected one of Publishers Weekly Best Books of 2014, and it resonates with readers who are looking for hope in impossible circumstances. She also has a children's book, A Hug from Heaven, which we speak about, and I really love that she's wrote this book that speaks to grieving children from the point of view of a loved one who died. So she's been featured in so many different places, the Washington Post, the Ladies Home Journal. Remember that magazine? I used to read that all the time. Women's Day, Time Magazine, and other publications, both print and online. And she lives in Virginia, close to where I used to live. In fact, right near the mall that I used to hang out with when I was a teenager. Yeah, and she has a blog. It's called An Inch of Gray. And so you should check out her blog. And she is going to be doing a podcast. So we talk about that too. So without further ado, let's get right into the interview. Welcome to another episode of Not Your Average Lives. And with me today, I have Anna Whiston-Donaldson. And I met her because she wrote a fantastic article, and it's about cicadas and children. And we have a lot of parallels in that. So welcome to the show, Anna.
Thank you so much, Lori. I'm really honored that you invited me to be on today.
Yeah, well, I'm excited because it's not very often. Like, I like to reach out to people, and I was like totally like, I don't know if she'll ever answer me. I found you on Facebook and or Instagram, and you answered, and I was like, yay. And I told my daughter, because my daughter was the one who introduced me to your article. So yeah, can you just tell a little bit of my audience about who you are, what you do, a little bit about your backstory?
Sure. I live in Northern Virginia, where you used to live. And I was a high school English teacher. And then I had some other jobs when my children were born. I had two kids 2 years apart, Jack and Margaret. And I think I was kind of living my average life, but very happy with that. And I was also a blogger. And so I've always had this writing bug, but I didn't have an outlet for it until blogging came around. And then 10 years ago, in September, my kids went out to play in the rain on the second day of school. And through a freak accident, my son Jack fell into a creek and then he drowned. So I went from, sort of this quiet average life, which I loved, with my husband and two kids in suburbia, to having this very public, tragic loss. And of course, it was excruciating. And that became a real turning point in my life at age 41, where I turned my writing into writing about grief in real time. And that's what led to me writing my first book, which was called Rare Bird, and it was about early grief. And I didn't set out to write a book. I just was writing because it was my way of showing up every day, showing people that I was still, breathing and functioning. And then it was only later that I realized that writing about grief was a way of using my gifts to help other people, the people who come after me, because there's always going to be grievers who come after you, and who need the encouragement and need that light on their path that you can keep on going. Because people think with child loss, they're like, well, I could never I could never survive if that happened. And I know that's a really real feeling. People believe that I could never survive. But the thing is, the truth is, there are so many people who have never been given that choice, and they just do it. They just survive. And so I feel like my writing has sort of demystified grief for people. And so I just was, going along raising my daughter while also grieving. And when I was 46, I got a surprise, and then my life pivoted in a whole different direction because I thought I was going to keep really focusing on my writing and my speaking engagements and, helping people in their grief. But then when I was 46, my husband and I found out we were pregnant. So we had a surprise little blessing, surprise baby on the scene. That has sort of been where my focus has been the last 5 years, because now I'm 52 and I have a newly minted kindergartner who now, thank God, is in school 5 days a week. And I'm ready to sort of see what the next change will be.
Yeah. So I do a lot of midlife transformational stories, but very few have come from this very grief stricken point. Nobody wants that kind of transformation. So I appreciate you coming on here and sharing and being so vulnerable. But yeah, what was so interesting, I saw a picture of you post on Instagram, and it was so funny because you said, "This is the day I was pregnant, but didn't know it." And it was like, so like you're back there with you kind of like really relating to that. But yeah, the thing that was struck me so much with Anna is that we had so many parallels with our kids. So the whole article is about cicadas and the season of cicadas and how you don't realize where you're going to be in 17 years. And she would have never thought. And so her son, Jack, was 5 when the cicada season hit. And my daughter is 17 years older, and she was 5. And Anna's daughter was 3, and my other daughter was 3. So we had these parallel lives that were matching up during the cicada seasons. And so here she is with Margaret and Jack at 5 and 3, and then 17 years forward, she's with Andrew, who's experiencing the cicadas at 5 years old. And that article just it gave me chills. It gave me hope that there is a greater power, because like Andrew came out of nowhere. So yeah, it was something that I really wanted. I reached out to her and said, yeah, I think you'd really inspire my audience with your story. So that's why I invited you here.
Thank you.
Let's talk about, the other thing that, I like to share inspiring stories of transformation. And you're going through one kind of now because you're exploring doing a podcast, and I will be one of your audience members because it sounds like really cool. So what are you working on now? Are you writing right now?
Now I have this little 5-year-old, which was a surprise, exciting thing to happen in my life. And so my writing has a little bit been on the back burner for a couple of years, as happens when you have a little kid. And my next project's a podcast. And although my writing for the past decade has been very, very heavy on grief and helping to demystify grief and helping support people in their grief, my podcast is going to be different. I'm partnering with a friend from our early blogging days. And the premise is going to be sort of, I haven't seen you in a decade. And you know what? A lot has happened in that decade. And the thing is, not just a lot has happened in my life with this horrible accident and then this turn of events, having a new child, but a lot has happened in those 10 years. And they have for my partner in this podcast as well. So we're really going to talk about sort of how we used to see things versus how we see things now. We're going to be looking at sort of being in the middle, not just in middle life, but also in the middle of things pulling us in different directions. For instance, caregiving elderly parents, and in my case, dealing with being in middle age and having a little one. So we're going to cover all sorts of things, but we're really excited about it and really staying grounded in the lives that we have versus the lives we thought we would have. Even 10 years ago, we thought things would be different. And I think that did come up in that article that you're talking about, because I remember being this young mom with these little kids and these cicadas and thinking, wow, the next time these cicadas come back, I'm going to be 51. And I couldn't even imagine being 51. What would that look like? And my 51 looks different than I could have imagined. but here I am in it, living it every day. And I kind of want to explore those kind of things in the podcast as well.
Yeah, yeah. I love that you said that. That yeah, looking at life, not so much as the life you thought you'd have, but the life you actually got,
Yeah.
the life that yeah, you said that, embracing the life you have versus the life you thought you would have. It's very
Yeah.
interesting. Yeah.
Because I think apart from grief, apart from so many different things, I think most of us have a life that is perhaps different than the one that we imagined. So how can we live into that
Mhm.
and embrace it and make it fulfilling?
Yeah. Yeah. And you also lost your mom young.
I did. I was 18 when she died. So even my young adulthood and all of my adulthood has been different than what I thought it would be. I have felt very much sort of on my own to try to figure things out. And, when I was a young mom and I had friends with a lot of parental support, I know you have grandkids and you love spending
Mhm.
time with them. I really was on my own in many ways. And it's interesting because now I'm doing it again on my own. And I know it's very possible. It just was different than the way
Yeah.
I thought it would have been.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
How do you like I feel like I'm a very, very fortunate person. I mean, I lost my grandfather when I was 17. Most people lose a grandparent, right? Then
Hmm.
I lost my father when I was 48. So I got a lot of years with my dad. Very, very lucky. So at some point, are you like waiting for the next, like, you know, tragedy to happen? How do you get past that mental state? I'm sure you go there, right?
Right. It's interesting. I remember I was driving in the car to some sort of church event, and I had this lovely lady in the car with me. And her daughter had died when her daughter was 12. And she, my friend in the seat next to me, was sort of breaking the news to me that she had advanced bone cancer. And I'm sitting there thinking, I can't believe this is happening to my friend, and her daughter died, and now this is happening. And I was having these feelings you're talking about, kind of like you pay your dues. When is it going to be done? And my friend, Jean, sitting next to me said, I don't ask why me. I say, why not me? And I thought that was interesting because definitely spent a lot of time saying, why me? In fact, I think I write about this in my first book. I really thought that if my mom died young, maybe that was going to be my thing. I didn't realize that in a whole long life, you're going to probably have multiple things, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah. And you were saying you just had a birthday and you're 6 years older than your mom was when she died. And I know a lot of
Yes.
people who have lost parents and they get to that age where their parent has died. It really
Yes.
is kind of a
Well, it's
passage or
strange
something.
because I think as an 18-year-old, I kind of thought maybe 46 was kind of old. I don't know. Well, my perspective has certainly changed on that.
Yes. Yes.
So now at 52, I still feel very young and I still have goals and dreams and I want to try new things and try to live tomorrow maybe differently than today. And that does kind of give me a twinge and a pang because I think, wow, of course my mom was still thriving. And so I was very sad. It's very sad to think of that her life was cut so short.
Mhm.
But I will say, I do not think that those who have gone before us and who have died, I don't feel like they're missing out on anything. It's more a pang I have for what I feel like she missed out on, but I don't believe that those who've gone ahead are missing out on anything.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a great perspective too. It's hard as a human, right? It's all
Yeah, it
about the
is hard as
physical
a human.
reality we live in, but yeah, to
Yes.
know they're there and, they're watching us and they're happy as can be.
Mhm,
It's a
mhm.
weird concept. So how do you get past the role of, yeah, it's so interesting that you love to blog. I work with business owners and they're like, I kind of want to blog. And so it's funny because I think blogging for me would be a chore. And that's why I wanted to do a podcast. I'm like, I love talking, like writing, and I like to write, but I like the end result of my writing. Going through the
Yes.
process is like,
Yes.
so
Yes.
yeah. So And there's this mommy blogger who recently lost a child, and it was so sad. Little girl, and she had gotten cancer,
Mhm.
and so a lot of her blogging now is about that because she's going through that grief cycle. And when I was reading some of the stuff that you shared with me and the questions, one of the things that came to me is I had forgotten about this, but I had a woman that I worked with long time ago when my kids were young, and I had a lot of like interaction with her, and I knew she had kids, but I didn't know a lot about her life. And one day I was in her office and I saw a picture, and I said, "Oh, your kids, like, how old are they?" And then she told me that one had died. Her son had died in a car accident and was with a neighbor, and like, the like three people were killed. It was just really super sad. And so, and every time after that, like, I always like felt like I saw her as the woman who lost a son, you
Mhm.
know? And so, like, how do you get past kind of that identity? Or do you, we're always a mom, even though our kids grow up, So yeah, how do you feel about that identity?
That's interesting because it's certainly the most unwanted kind of distinction. How you talk about not your average life, right? Well, it's something that separates you and it does make your life not average, but it's in a very unwanted way. And I think
Yes.
that, I think you can go forward in different ways. Because I was a writer already, I went forward by writing and writing and writing about it. And I feel like that really, at first, I did it because I wanted the people who followed me to know that I was okay. So I would show up and write, and then they would show up and read it. And so it was later when I realized that my writing was actually helping other people. At the beginning, it was just a way of just showing up. And, you know, I don't know, maybe when people see me on the street, maybe I'm that person. Oh, she's the one whose son died. But of course, there's so much more to me.
Hmm.
I was talking to a friend a couple days ago, and her son died very suddenly. And she said, I was talking, even though I'd never met her son, I mentioned him, I called him by name, which is very important. And I said something about his personality. And later she texted me and she said, "Thank you for, treating him as a real person." And I said, "Oh, he is a real person to me, even though I've never met him. He's not just the boy who died XYZ way. Just like my son, Jack, is not just the boy in the creek. Now, to some people, 10 years later, oh, yeah, Jack, the boy in the creek. But I know of 12 years of Jack being Jack that had nothing to do with a split-second accident. And so there's a lot more to me, too, than just a grieving mom.
Yeah, yeah. And I just had this like aha moment while you're explaining that. And I was thinking, I think part of what happened with me and my perception of her is that I had this idea of her, and then it changed. And so
Yeah,
I had
yeah.
this totally different like idea of her. And so I think like being like super open, it was like she was hiding something. And then all of a sudden the secret was out. And
Mhm.
so I think the fact that you write about it and you're so open about it, I think it helps. It helps. And yeah, it helps that you feel more real and feel more like, oh, she's just more of a person, of not just that role of a person, but you're all these other things as well. So
Mhm.
that was an interesting perspective that, yeah, I thought of when I was going through this. Yeah. So what does one of the things that I was wondering is, what are some of the misconceptions about grief that like some people might have, since you've
Yeah, I
written
think
about it?
there Sure. I think there's a lot of misconceptions. I guess I would mention two, and they're going to seem contradictory, okay? But I feel like they're both misconceptions of grief. The first one I would say is, that, grief gets wrapped up in a bow at the 1 year mark. Like somehow 1 year is so significant that grief ends or is fixed or solved or whatever. And that's just not true. In many cases, at the end of that first year, that's when a numbness will wear off. And then reality of the future sets in. And it can actually be harder for grieving people. I'm not saying it has to be. I'm saying often getting past that 1 year mark is actually harder. They feel like they've left their loved one further behind them in the past. As those calendar pages have changed, they're realizing, wow, I have this life ahead of me that I have to live, and it's still incredibly painful. So I think that's a misconception. There really isn't that kind of timeline on grief. Now, another misconception, which it may seem, what I'm saying may seem contradictory, but this is just played out, I've seen it so many times, is that grief lasts forever, that it never gets better. That's another misconception. And I think the reason that grieving people perpetuate that misconception is because they're in so much pain and they're not getting acknowledgement. So when Jack died, this adorable little 12-year-old kid who was there 1 minute and gone the next minute, we received tons of acknowledgement. Even your daughter, who's reading it about in the paper, she knows just how bad that is, right? To have your kid die. So she's feeling it. People all around us were feeling it and acknowledging it. But a lot of times grief doesn't get acknowledged. And that creates this void. For instance, if someone dies by suicide or dies
Yes.
of an overdose, or let's say it's an adult child, or let's say it's a child who's had multiple handicaps, and so you're thinking inside, well, maybe that's just feels like a blessing to that person. There's all these ways that sometimes we don't acknowledge grief for people. We don't acknowledge just how huge it is that their person has gone along ahead of them. And because of that, grievers often feel the need, and I totally understand it, to dig in and say, this will last forever. I will always feel this bad. It never gets better. But I think that's a misconception, because, and I feel like it does do a disservice to the grievers who come after us, because if you hear it never gets better, where's the hope there? Okay. I feel like if people get that proper acknowledgement, then that gives them the inner strength to start to heal. But you need that acknowledgement, not just like right when it happens. You need that acknowledgement 10 years later. You need that acknowledgement when different things start to happen in people's lives, marriages, graduations, the acknowledgement that that pain is still there. But the grief itself doesn't have to last forever. What I mean by that is there can be joy in life again. And
Yeah, what came to mind was,
yeah,
I can so see that happening with suicide or, an overdose or something like that. It also made me think about people who are older, and you think like, oh, because they're in their 90s,
yeah,
they lived a good life, and I can see
yeah.
where that lack of acknowledgement might happen just because of age.
Yes, it's just assumptions that we make.
Mm-hmm.
And I just feel like acknowledgement is important. And you may be like, well, sure, that person was really old, but we really shouldn't compare grief. We should think about the griever and how they're feeling, and just acknowledge them. And I don't consider grief a life sentence. I consider it a love sentence. And what I mean by that is you don't have to feel this bad forever. Like legitimately, you can find joy again. And the grief over time will likely, like if you've had acknowledgement and if you've been able to sort of think about your grief and process it and deal with it, the grief will soften and lessen. And then that creates a bigger space for you to just feel the love of the relationship that and just treasure that love. And so I consider it a love sentence, not a life sentence, which might sound hokey, but that's how I picture it in my own life, that I don't still have that level of pain about Jack dying. Now, as we have life events, as we have the cicadas, as we have his friends who are starting to get married, which is just super crazy to me. It's just like, how is life going so fast? I still need acknowledgement, but that level of pain and intense grief and intense longing has lessened very, very much. And that's why I think that healing is possible.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I don't use the word closure, because I feel like that's another misconception. There's like closure, and people say it all the time. They'll even be like, I'm glad we got to have that funeral because that provides closure. And it's like, in a way, that's when the grieving is just beginning, and we have to give ourselves permission to grieve and mourn, not just to numb it and ignore it, give ourselves permission to. And that to me is not a closing, it's an opening. It's being open to healing, being open to what life is going to look like, even though this isn't how you wanted your life to be.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel like you as a writer, it's like, it's almost like that was your job, is to express like your grief to others, so that, and that's the gift, the gift of Jack's death. I mean, it's horrible, it's sad, but you have such a gift of writing, and that has, you produced these books, and I'm sure helped so many people as a result of that.
Yeah. And it's interesting because there can be a gift of something, and that doesn't mean you're ever going to think that it was worth it.
Right.
Okay. But there can still be gifts in that.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you have a daughter too. And that's another parallel, is that your daughter, I think, is a couple of years younger than Jack. And
2 years.
yeah. And so your kids were the same age. Mine were 5 and 3 with the cicadas. And so they were 5 and 3 with the cicadas. And so, and then as a mom, you have to navigate that as well, because your daughter experiencing at a very young age such a significant loss.
Yeah. I've got to tell you, that was the hardest, saddest thing about having Jack die, was to see his sister not have her absolute best friend. And as she goes through developmental stages, those secondary losses continue to pile up.
Yeah. So you were saying she's 20 now. So you've got these like big gap of children. So you got one, probably, was he in kindergarten now?
He just started
kindergarten, a junior in college. Wow. Different.
Yeah.
Yeah. Different extremes. Yeah. And what I also thought was interesting, and I think it was in your latest blog post that you're writing about, how you're at a different age than a lot of parents of 5-year-olds. And that was a very nice way of putting it. Yeah. I do think I am the only 52-year-old at kindergarten pickup. It's more common for men probably to be that age, but like not necessarily
but
women.
Like, I don't have a trophy wife. I am my own. We don't have anyone much younger taking care of our little guy. His name's Andrew. And it's different. And once again, not your average life. It's not your average life, but it is the life that I'm in. And I am just doing it. I mean, at first, when I found out I was pregnant, I thought, how am I going to do car seats again? How am I going to do this? Oh my gosh. The friend drama, lice, right? All this stuff happened.
Oh my God, we had lice.
Right?
Yeah.
But then I didn't even know that we were going to have a global pandemic, while I'm at home with this little guy. So, I just think this whole process, I try not to look too far ahead. I have just tried to just do it day by day.
So and maybe you don't want to answer this, maybe this is too personal, but I'm just like, sometimes go there. So were you at practicing safe sex, or because the reason why I asked this, because I have a friend who is, she was, I went to her wedding and she was remarried. Her husband died. And when he died, she had a 2-year-old, a 4-year-old, and a 6-year-old. And it was so, so sad. He had a cerebral hemorrhage. And so she remarried, and she was getting ready to turn 49. And he recovered from, I forget what kind of cancer, but he had cancer. And they told him, because of the radiation, that he was sterile, that he would never be able to have kids. And he didn't have any kids before, so no kids. And since he hadn't had kids, I guess there was proof of that. So they didn't worry about it. Yeah. And then she gets pregnant like a month within them getting married. And she's like on the verge of, turning 49, and she was almost 50 when she had the baby. It was great though, because he had never had a kid before, and he had his first child. And then it was her first son. She had 3 girls, and it was her first son. So yeah, but it's crazy because she's my age and she's still got a kid that's all her older kids are now graduating from college.
Can I be her friend?
Yeah.
I love to hear stories like that, because it makes me feel a little less alone. And that's the whole point of stories, right?
Yeah.
But also it makes me feel a little less stupid, because yes, I thought I was in perimenopause, if not menopause. And we were not actively trying to have a baby. I will say, I don't want to be flippant about it, because I know many, many, many people want to have a child and are not able to. And I know that. For us, it just really did hit us out of the blue. It
Yeah,
did
you
feel very,
adjusted. You adjust to a lifestyle a certain way, right?
yeah. Oh, we were adjusted. We were adjusted. And, it's pretty neat that it didn't happen right when Jack died, even though I was a lot younger, just because I feel like I was able to focus on my grief for a little while, focus on nurturing Margaret, focus on using my gifts to help other people. Because I do feel like once Andrew came along, that it's just hard. And so I feel like some of that has been put on hold, as I've really, really, really been focusing on him, which is understandable. I will say that maybe the story you just told in my story could be a cautionary tale that people might still be fertile even when they don't think they are.
Yeah.
But I
But,
really
the reason why I
trusted.
asked that is because I was, it just really he seems like such a gift, like,
Yes.
the parallels of how everything
Yeah.
worked.
Lori, he is, I will say that I try to operate my life in a state of radical trust and just trusting my life story, trusting that Jack did what he was supposed to do while he was here, trusting, that things are the way they should be. And I can only do that for myself. I'm not putting that on anyone else. But I think the fact that my husband and I always had kind of wanted a third child, but we never had done anything about it because I actually felt like it was asking God for too much because I had these two great kids and I felt like I was just sort of pushing it, like trying too hard. Why should I ask for something more? Right. And so my husband and I just hemmed and hawed for, more than a decade about having a third child before we just were like, whatever, we're too old. So I think the fact that Andrew showed up without our trying is the only way that this little soul was going to be a part of our family. And
Yeah.
I think that I can really, there are hard days and there are great days, but on those hard days, I just trust that this is exactly, the right timing and exactly the right kid, because you're right, he is phenomenal. And so I just try to trust in that story and trust that someone bigger than me is making a lot of these plans.
Yeah. That's beautiful. Yeah. And I love to know what you think about how you've changed in terms of being present, because I find as a grandmother, I am so different with my
Mhm.
grandchildren. And I often think, oh, because I was a young mom and I was like, and I wished I had the wisdom that I have now back then, but I just enjoy those moments, and I don't rush ahead to the next thing when I'm with them. I
Mhm.
really am much more interested in every little thing, every little moment, and the things they say and how cute they are, and this just the giggles, the baby giggles. And so, yeah, I just wonder, do you have a different sense of being present with Andrew versus when you were a younger mom of Margaret and Jack?
It's definitely different, not necessarily in the same ways that you're describing. I definitely do feel like I'm more wise and I have more perspective because I think that I would get so wrapped up in whatever the problem of the day was back then. So that's good. Like I feel like I have wisdom and I have perspective, which I did not have then. But I will also say that I don't know if I'm more present. I think that having one little guy at home instead of having two with Jack and Margaret, like I find that one is really challenging because I'm the playmate, I'm the entertainment, right? So that's that. I don't feel like I don't feel like I'm more present. I feel like I'm on my phone a lot and think about it. 22 years ago, we didn't have that kind of
That's
distraction.
true. Yes.
So
Yeah.
I am humbled. I am humbled by how much time I devote to my phone. And it just makes me sad because I wasn't like that before. I remember feeling guilty when my other kids were little that I would read the Washington Post every day. And I remember thinking, oh, is that time taking away from my kids? And now I'm thinking, oh my gosh. It's just the contrast is stark with how much time I am like fiddling with my phone. And I'm not trying to judge people for that. I'm just saying this is a struggle that I have.
Yeah, you need a timeout for your phone. That's what
I need
my
a
daughter,
major
she created this
timeout.
basket and they have like timeouts for their, yeah, that's funny.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. But I
So,
do
but
feel like I'm wiser and I have more perspective. I also have more of appreciation for like some of the little things. I remember a week or so ago, my husband and I were just like both just kind of wrapped around the axle about, being older parents and something frustrating happening in our house with our son. I have no idea what it was. And I said to him, I said, when we look at pictures of Jack and Margaret when they were little, when we think of those good moments, those days were just like this. You don't see that in the picture, you don't remember that part. But those days were just like this with their frustrations and squabbles and stubbornness, whatever it may be. But we look back at that now and we think, oh, those were such good days. So we're actually in good days right now if we could just realize it.
yes, so true. So true. Yeah. I have so many thoughts going through my head as like, and also like worried about like, we could go on forever because of all the questions that I have. But one thing that came up was it's so interesting how you talk about the one child perspective, because I have had like people say to me who are younger, who only have one kid, I don't know, I could double the work. And it was so funny because my perspective was always, I thought it was easier with two because you're doing for one already and you're just adding one more on the mix. I said, it's not like twice as much work, maybe one and a half, but yeah, it's true. They entertain each other. And my youngest daughter has now she has a 3-year-old and he's like 7-8 months now. And they are like already entertaining themselves.
That's
So
amazing.
yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I definitely and my second when she was little was a handful, I will tell you that. But I I agree with that. And I think that many families, when they choose to just have one, which is totally fine. And, that's how Andrew will be raised because Margaret is almost an adult. I think unless we figure out how to make childcare affordable and support women in their work, I think that, yeah, maybe having one versus two isn't double the work. But when you think of the financial impact on women on women and their work and their careers, I think that, every time you add a kid, you're looking at that. And I feel
Yes.
like that's something that we haven't really addressed as a country. And
Mhm.
anyway.
Yeah. 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 That's why I quit my job and stayed home for 3 years before going back. But anyways, yeah. And then I had a question about, now I know you wrote a book for children about grief. And I was curious how that came about. Was it to help, is it because you had Andrew and you thought this would be a good thing to have a conversation with him about? And it was funny because I was with my 3-year-old grandson recently and he wanted to watch a show he'd watched 1,000 times. And I was like, no, I was babysitting him while his parents were out of town. And I said, I've been wanting to watch Soul, this Disney Plus movie. And
Right.
I heard great things about it. So I'm going to watch Soul. And then and I loved it. But some of the concepts were, of course, a little above a 3-year-old's
Yes.
head.
Yes.
And so he was mesmerized. Like he was really resistant to watch a show that he had never seen before and didn't know anything about, but he did not leave that movie. And he's wanted to watch it again. He's watched it again a couple times and I was just up there. So we probably saw it like 3 weeks ago and I was up there a couple of nights ago and my daughter said, yeah, he's watched it. And he said the guy's name. I didn't even remember the guy's name in the movie. Oh yeah, Joe Gardner. Joe Gardner's, he's just sort of like he remembers everything. But one thing really interesting he said to me, which struck me, because these kids, I think they're still really connected to who they used to be and all that other stuff. And he goes, he calls me Nanny. He goes, Nanny, remember when I was a baby and there were the new souls? And I was like,
What?
yes. And I'm like, I didn't even know he understood the concept of all the little new souls running around that interim place. Yeah. And I'm like, where did that come from? So yeah, I would just love to know where that book, how that came to be. And I just love the idea of it.
So my first book, Rare Bird, is a memoir of early grief, right? And so that's the book that when someone knows someone who has lost a child or lost any loved one or someone who is supporting someone in grief, that's the go-to book for early grief because it's really raw and really real. And I'm so glad I didn't write it 10 years later. Maybe I would have had more wisdom or something, but there's something awesome about writing it as it happened because it's unflinching, you know? But the children's book is called A Hug from Heaven. And that really does contain the wisdom and knowledge about healthy grieving for kids. So it's written as a poem, like from the
Oh,
person who died to the child. And it could be a sibling, an aunt, uncle, a best friend, a grandmother. It doesn't matter. If the person who died is addressing the kid and basically telling them that it's okay to laugh, you know, it's okay to cry, it's okay to be angry, and it's told in a poem form. And that really contains the wisdom and the knowledge that I've gained about grief and healing. And so it's so simple because I thought, I don't want to write a children's book. You know, I write memoirs and I write blah, blah, blah. And I'm so glad I wrote it because it is touching so many people and
hmm.
adults love it too.
Yeah. I love that it's a poem because it's like kind of like, everybody knows that Dr. Seuss,
Yeah.
uh, I forget what you call it in the poem lingo, but yeah, it's catching and kids remember that. So,
Yeah. I just got an email from an arts center in Mongolia yesterday that has somehow come upon it and they'd like to translate it. So it's pretty exciting to think that healthy grieving, that the message of healthy grieving is getting spread around. So that makes me really happy.
yeah, and everybody experience it, whole wide world. That's amazing. All right. Well, it's been a great conversation. I wanted to ask you as we sign off or before we sign off, what does living a not your average life mean to you and how do you exemplify it? Just
Oh
in your
my.
words, in your words.
Okay. Well, I will say that I think I kind of always aspired for a very average life, right? But I think that some of the curveballs that life has thrown me have helped me live a bigger life, a life of using my gifts to serve other people. And I think that's how I live a not your average life.
Did you, when Jack died, were you a blogger that like did it as a business or was it more of a for fun and you just like to write?
It was fun. It was a great creative outlet for me. I had a regular job, but then I had blogging and it made a community. And I know that you're very into community too.
Hmm.
And there's just something so amazing about community and friendship and finding common ground with people. And that's what I think writing does for me. I'm hoping podcasting will too. Who knows?
Yeah. Yeah. You probably have some good show notes. Yeah. Did you want to write? I love talking about people's like, gifts that they have that they, are born with even. And it sounds like you really, did you write as a younger person?
I didn't. It wasn't. And I was an English teacher in my
Oh,
early career, a high school English teacher. But
my
I
mother
still
was a high school English teacher.
really,
Yes, and
oh,
I was
that's
studying
great.
to be an English teacher, and I actually had an opportunity to have you know, uh, I, I did it at Luther Jackson right there in
Oh my
Maryfield.
gosh,
Yeah, yeah.
yes.
I had like a 9-week stint when the teacher went out. I hated it. So I was
Yeah,
like,
that was it
yeah,
for you, right?
yeah, yeah.
Well, I will tell you that I taught writing. And of course, these kids are like in their 40s now. Eek! I taught writing, but I didn't do much writing myself. And blogging, when it sort of came on the scene, was such a great fit for me because I was never a journaler. I wasn't wanting to write to myself or write to God. I wanted to like write to someone. And blogging filled that because I was writing to people out there who became my community and became my friends. And so I didn't always know I wanted to write, but as soon as I started writing, I didn't want to stop. And that's why it's been hard these past couple of years to sort of feel like I haven't been writing very much. I don't exercise. I need to start exercising, but I think that it's similar, or so I've heard. Sometimes when you don't want to exercise, but you do it and you're glad you did it. Well, with writing, sometimes I dread doing it, but I'm always so glad when I have done it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's so true. I'm writing a book right now and it's like stalled. So
Awesome. Keep at it. Keep at it.
my goal in the fourth quarter is to finish it. So yeah. Yeah.
Good.
So thank you so much for being here, being so open, being so honest, being so vulnerable, and sharing your story. And, I'll continue to be a big fan.
Yeah, well, it's my pleasure. And I love what you do. And I love that you're encouraging, women like me.
Yeah. Yeah. It's fun. It's fun. And I can't wait till when you start your podcast. It's going to be amazing. I'll have to have you back on and we can talk about your
Oh,
podcast. Yeah.
yes. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you so much for tuning into the Not Your Average Lives podcast. If you haven't yet, make sure to subscribe on iTunes if you have an Apple device. You can find free resources and learn what else I have going on at the moment that might interest you on my website at notyouraveragegrandma.com. You can also find me on Instagram or Facebook at Not Your Average Grandma. If you liked this episode, it would make my heart so happy if you could leave me a 5-star rating. You can also add a review to let me know what you like about this podcast, which will help spread the word about it to others who need a little midlife inspiration. As always, be you, listen to your inner voice, and focus on reigniting that lost spark so you can start living your own, not your average life.